Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Rational Standard podcast. It's been quite an eventful week in South Africa and the world, as it always is. Last time I was on the podcast, I predicted that we might not have another podcast. Fortunately, I was wrong. We didn't have World War III, and it seems that a lot of attempts at World War III may have been averted. Our topic today, our first one, is a foreign policy topic that's less concerning South Africa, but very much concerning the entire world. And that is, of course, talking about US President Donald Trump's obsession with Greenland and acquiring Greenland for his glorious new Donro empire. So this has been something he's been obsessed with since he was elected to office in the second term. And despite his advisors and allies in the White House kind of trying to push it to a different agenda. You know, you could say, hey, he wants to take Greenland and then he wants to invade Canada. And then Marco Rubio is like, hey, can we please kidnap Maduro first? But it seems that even the downfall of the Iranian regime was not a good enough distraction for him, because he has been really turning up the heat on trying to acquire Greenland for the American empire. And to the point where he even threatened 8 countries who were perceived as resisting this takeover with 10% tariffs. Now, fortunately, at Davos recently, which a day or two ago, it was announced that they've come to an agreement, a framework, which hasn't become public yet, so we don't exactly know what it contains. But it does mean that NATO may have been damaged, which we will discuss in this podcast, but at least this isn't collapsing just yet. First, Martin, I would like to know, because this is a topic which we might, because usually we're a little bit hawkish. We like, when America's sticking its noses into things, but I think that we probably agree this is not really the best way for America to stick its nose into things.
Yeah, so I mean, being a hawk means you support kind of countries assisting their allies defending themselves. But when they start attacking their allies, kind of that equation changes entirely. So I've been on record. I've said that if he takes any aggressive action against Greenland, against Denmark, really effectively, he should be kind of arrested by his own kind of law enforcement, and he definitely should cease being the president of the U.S. Attacking your own allies really is one of those kind of red lines that no one should be allowed to cross. On the other hand, I don't think he has any intention of attacking kind of European forces. I don't think that's going to happen. I also think that it would be quite a stretch, even for a relatively pro-Trump American military, to start shooting at kind of Danish soldiers. I think that's probably something that his generals will tell him, listen, you can give the order, but we're not really going to do this. So I don't really think it was ever on the agenda. And as I was telling David earlier, my worry is that this has been kind of a distraction to kind of draw attention away from Trump's inaction on Iran, and it's worked brilliantly. Just a week ago, when we did our last podcast, Iran was in the news. That was the story. That was the global story. The Iranian regime being on the precipice of collapse, and the American government saying, we're coming, we're there with you. And then we started hearing, well, J.D. Vance said he's not keen on attacking, and others are saying, well, we don't know if it would destabilize the region or whatever. And then clearly Trump got very cold on taking action against the Tehran regime. And then suddenly the story was first for a moment replaced by people going insane over a medal, heads of state were talking about medals, the Nobel Peace Prize medal. This was now a story. Somehow this was a bigger story than what was happening in Iran. and then we went over to Greenland, and now everyone is still talking about Greenland. The Germans even sent troops, and I think the Netherlands and France sent some troops to Greenland, something they never did for even for Ukraine in their own backyard, where there is an actual threat to European security. They sent troops to Greenland, infuriating. Um, and I think that kind of blew over now, but it's been a perfect distraction because the Iran topic is now off the agenda, and now we're supposed to just accept that the news cycle has moved on. It's insulting to the. I think it's now some numbers, we don't have exact numbers, but up to 50,000 people having been killed or disappeared by the Iranian regime at this stage. I mean, that is genocide levels. If you want to call Gaza a genocide, then you have to accept that this is certainly a genocide, because the speed at which those numbers have been kind of accumulating is I would say almost unprecedented. So that's happening in Iran, and we're talking about a patch of ice that has no real kind of threat to its, I mean, no actual threat to its sovereignty. Now, could it damage NATO? Sure. I do think NATO needs some waking up. Uh, I think NATO has been extremely. It's a defensive alliance. It's a military pact, but it has omitted to get militarily involved in at least since Libya, and maybe understandably since Libya. But maybe NATO does need a shake-up, and Trump has been doing that in many ways. He's been getting European countries to invest more into NATO, so that it's not that NATO is not just a cover for the US. So I mean that's at least good, and hopefully, if anything, hopefully the outcome of this is that the European NATO members realize, number one, the United States is not always a reliable ally. This is a lesson that they should have learned long ago, but hopefully now it's going to be something that actually sticks. The US is not always going to do what is necessary to protect international peace and security, and the Ukraine is a good example of this. And secondly, it will shatter this, help shatter this this fantasy land that we've lived in after the Second World War, that there is no wars happening, like the post war peace that we're apparently living in, that we've apparently been living in for 50 years, except there's wars happening everywhere. Like there's still wars happening, but we've convinced ourselves that it's a peaceful time and we should all just stay calm. Hopefully this kind of wakes someone up and they're like, okay, actually you have to apply military power to stop but worse things from happening. So maybe we'll see more Europeans taking note of that. I have my doubts, unfortunately. And yeah, just kind of the last thing I think people forget on Greenland is that this is such a retarded idea by Trump to take Greenland. I mean, maybe if he has a stronger lease of the bases, maybe that's something that will stick. But him taking Greenland, it's such a retarded idea that the Democrats will reverse it like on day one if they're ever back in office. Like the next Democratic president will give Greenland back to Denmark. I mean, that's just guaranteed. So there's no doubt about that. If the US pulls out of NATO, the next Democrat will put the US back in NATO. So I do think on this score, on this specific topic, people need to just calm down a little bit. I understand the emotions are running high, but just calm down a little bit. He is not a king. He has some kooky ideas. All of it can be reversed. And maybe there is some benefit here of waking the Europeans up, having them rearm as they should have, as they should have done many years ago. So maybe there is some benefit coming out of this. But I'm glad to hear that they've found some kind of lease, or what was it, that the US would have sovereignty over its bases, that kind of idea. That sounds a little bit more reasonable.
Yeah, I don't know if that was confirmed just yet. So that was from a William Spaniel video where he's a foreign policy expert, and he's been, one of the comments on one of his videos, which is very interesting. He says that the doomsday clock, ignore that. You should see the global instability by his upload schedule. And he's been uploading a video almost daily since the start of the year. So 2 seconds of midnight. But he had 2 interesting videos on Greenland that I watched. He's actually got many, but these are the ones I watched because there's too many a day for the current climate. One, this was his prediction of what the framework is that U.S. bases will have sovereignty over themselves, so that each base will be U.S. territory. That's just a prediction. It sounds like something that would please Trump. And the other thing is that NATO will shoulder a more equal burden for Arctic protection. Now, that's something which I wanted to talk about, and also what I wanted to put towards you, David, as well. When we try to think about what is Trump actually thinking here? Is he a dumbass? Is he just being a king who's just trying to like seize territory because Greenland looks big on a map? Or is this truly about the threat of the future of Arctic warfare, with the ice caps melting and the Arctic Passage and the worry about deep water ports there not being under American control? But before I get to you on that, I just want to say the other William Spaniel video where we spoke about why this is such a bad move by Trump, is he says everything that Trump has said they want to do with Greenland, they already can do. They already have military bases there on Greenland, which are U.S. military bases. They already have observation posts. It was America which chose to pull troops out of that when, after the Cold War ended, they think that they didn't need it anymore. There's a base there that can house over 6,000 people, and it's currently only got 150. And that they chose to do that. They can just send them back. There's nothing stopping that. So this is what I have a problem with a lot of people who say that Donald Trump is this amazing negotiator, 4D chess, 25D chess. He's just he's gaslighting NATO into pulling its weight. These must be smarter ways of doing this, like actually just saying, hey, NATO, Russia is on your border. We're an ocean away. Maybe pick up a little bit of the slack. But at the same time, I think that NATO has in the past picked up slack. Article 5 was only triggered once, and it was the NATO helping America. I think that there's also more pressing immediate concerns in Greenland, which is basically saying if the ice caps melt and the Arctic Circle becomes the new theater of warfare. But David, do you think this is rational, or do you think this is Trump being Trump?
Well, I think definitely the Arctic, the North Atlantic, has become a very important strategic theater, given the way in which geopolitics is moving. I think the opening up of the Northwestern Passage, I think as the ice caps melt, I think that is of huge geostrategic significance. And I think people are right to be focusing on that territory. I mean, there is a lot of Chinese activity around there. Supposedly scientific investigations by Chinese vessels. A lot of obviously Russian influence there. That the GIUK, it's called the GIUK, Greenland, Iceland, UK corridor, is also a very important naval passage there. So I think it is very important. And obviously, if you kind of look at a map from the top down, you'll see actually the proximity of the United States of continental America to Russia, and a lot of intercontinental ballistic missiles, if they were to be fired from Russia, would go directly over Greenland. And at that inflection point, that would be the easiest place to take out any potential missile attack. But Martin makes a very important point, and I think you did it as well, Nicholas, that Greenland is already an ally. There are already established military relationships there. In effect, the United States has carte blanche. It can, under the NATO agreements, it can establish a military presence there. I think there is perhaps, a lot of people make very reductive arguments sometimes about Donald Trump, that he's very driven by ego and his sense of his own place in history. And I think that's probably what's happening this time around. I think he is hearkening back to a previous era in America where this idea of territorial expansion was really important. I mean, he's a big fan of William McKinley, who was part of that, the kind of Alaska Purchase. I can't remember if that was under McKinley. And the kind of westward expansion of America is really baked into the mythology and the history of America and how it sees itself. And I think Trump sees this as part of his legacy. He wants to be one of the presidents that expanded America's territory. So I think there is a kind of a venal undercurrent to this. And I fully agree with Martin that NATO needs a shakeup. There needs to be more burden sharing, more cost sharing. There needs to be a greater recognition of the threat from Russia in the east. And there are all sorts of counter arguments that NATO started it and they got involved in Russia's sphere of influence. But be that as it may, there is a very serious conflict in the east there, and I think Russia needs to be kind of treated as a legitimate threat. And my worry here is that yes, the United States is the prevailing and dominant military superpower, as we saw with Maduro and in Fordo last year. The advanced technological capabilities that the US military has can really shift outcomes very dramatically around the world, and they can act with a very high degree of unilateralism. And for all the faults of multilateralism, it does give you strength in numbers. It gives you institutional legitimacy. It gives you reach. And I think, particularly in terms of controlling Russian power and containing that, I think undermining the stability of NATO, which I think this move on Greenland threatens to do, is actually playing into the hands of your enemies. And I think we were talking at length over this year, this very short but intense year, about the threats to liberty posed by the odious regimes in Tehran and Caracas. And that those are not only have they violated the rights of their own citizens, but have also destabilized the region, the respective regions, and caused a lot of chaos. And I think there are very legitimate arguments for intervention in both of those jurisdictions. But Greenland is a peaceful neighbor. It is not threatening liberty in any real sense. It is strategically significant, but the autonomous rights of its people also matter, and the kind of broader relationships with NATO also, I think, are very important to preserve. And I think that the danger with Trump is that because he is willing to think out of the box, he's willing to do dramatic things, and to when his opponents say that Taco, Trump always chickens out, and then he calls the bluff, and then he actually goes and does it. I think that can create healthy disruption and positive outcomes. But when you have a hot hand, the temptation is to be more and more reckless. But sometimes you can actually engage in hubris, and things can blow up in your face. You just ask Alexander the Great or Napoleon, who one success after another, things are going great, you're on top of the world, and then suddenly things can turn very quickly against you. So I think that caution is not something in Mr. Trump's kind of array of character traits, but I think he'd be wise to be a bit cautious here. And I think a very good lesson here is what happened in Canada. Pierre Poilievre was on a winning streak. He was looking like he was going to unseat the Liberal government. And there are a lot of Canadians, I think, who were fed up with the kind of woke direction of Canadian politics. I have a few friends who live in Canada, and I don't know. I mean, it's supposedly a liberal democracy, capitalist country, but it sounds like communism to me there, if you ever hear any stories about the healthcare system there. And, all of this invective and rhetoric around annexing Canada and making it the 51st state actually really undermined potential allies in that country. I think there were a lot of people in Canada who were probably very favorably disposed to Trump and his agenda, and they suffered a huge electoral setback. And now you have, for want of a better expression, a kind of a globalist elite in the form of Mark Carney, who's cozying up with the Chinese, striking deals with them. So I think there is a lot at stake here, and I think you must be very careful of not playing into your enemy's hands. Nicholas.
I think that's actually a very good point, especially if you look at Russian social media, if you look at the statements from their embassies, from their from news sites and platforms and bots that we know are Russian backed, they're egging Trump on to take Greenland. They've been putting things out there saying that Greenland's actually legitimately a part of the United States. They've been putting in like fake history that the US owned it before. They've been spreading misinformation. If you didn't think that they would actually, and this is probably why a lot of MAGA supporters and so-called conservatives support Russia, is because they talk on the talking points that would feed into the MAGA ego, but they're doing it for their own ends. They're doing it because they want to keep Trump isolationist. They would love it if the Don Roe Doctrine took its logical conclusion, which is that America only cares about creating an absolutist empire in the Western Hemisphere and didn't care about the rest of the world. Because I don't think Russia is that ballsy yet to think that it can take American territory, but it is ballsy enough to take European territory.
Nicholas, I think just a quick point. The very wise words of a global strategic thinker who really was a giant in terms of understanding the complex relationship between the United States and Russia was, of course, Sarah Palin, who said that she can see Russia from her house. And she was widely derided at the time, but I think there was a kernel of wisdom there. And I think more important actually is the Bering Sea. And
yes,
that there, Russia has actually been testing the limits of US airspace. That is also a significant corridor into the Arctic. And I think also the closer proximity to China as well is very significant there. So I think all of this attention on Greenland is perhaps distracting from that area around Alaska.
That's actually a very, very good point, because the thing is that, as I said, I think that Russia is always prepared to know that America, even if they have this Western Hemisphere obsession now, is not going to abandon the entire world. And also, Bering Straits is in the Western Hemisphere. I think the problem with Russia, and we know that anyone who's read anything about Russian history, if they've read right down to medieval Russian history, is that Russian polities are never satisfied. They always want to expand. So even if they somehow took over all of continental Asia and all of Europe, they would eventually somehow manage to hold on to it. They won't be able to, fortunately. They would turn to America, and also they're probably wanting to fight America now, thinking, "Oh no, it's America that will not allow this to happen. We beat up America first, then we take the rest of the world." They truly are like brain and pinky in the brain. Fortunately, they keep getting foiled. But a point that both you guys touched on of the rising multilateralism, and I think we can still see purely on technology, on accumulated economic and military power, America is leagues above everyone else. They're effectively an extraterrestrial force, but they're limited by their own ideology and their own willpower, so they can mess with things and they can probably win almost any engagement operation they want to do. They just don't. And they also don't sometimes for a rational reason, because if they actually have a direct confrontation with another nuclear power, that is something we don't want to get into. So that's why it's actually very important that, and I think that we can all agree here that what we really want is a strong multilateral West. We want all the good Western democracies to be powerful. We want them all to have their own military. We all want them to be military powerhouses in their own right. We all want them to be what France thinks it is. But the problem is that the voters in these democracies are extremely selfish, frankly. They don't see the bigger picture. They think, oh no, I must have my overpriced free healthcare. I must have my overpriced free education. I need to have my, I need to be able to have like the 5-day weekends. I need to be able to absorb massive amounts of illegal immigration that ends up taking up more welfare space, then without producing more jobs, without cutting red tape to produce more jobs. They want to have their cake, regulate their cake, eat their cake, destroy the cake, throw the cake at someone's face, and all at the same time. And I think that Europe has been living a fairy tale since the end of the Cold War, definitely, and even for parts of Western Europe has been living a fairy tale since the end of World War II. And I think that I don't want to give credit to Trump for breaking this fairy tale. I'd actually give credit to Putin for breaking this fairy tale. But I would say that no one gets the credit for actually waking them up properly, because I still think they're asleep.
Yeah, I think that's the point. The fairy tale hasn't been broken, so we shouldn't be giving anyone any credit for anything quite yet. That I was telling some friends this week that people are already talking about Europe is waking up, or Europe has woken up, and I am very skeptical about that line of thinking. I think the entrenchment of the European welfare, let's say the European social spending model, is very, very deeply entrenched, and I think it's gonna we are going to find ourselves flabbergasted by what Europe is prepared to allow around itself just to keep on the gravy train. I think we're all going to be very surprised at how deep Europe's kind of tolerance is for abuse. And that is something very worrying, because I agree with you, Nicholas. I think a strong multilateral West is the ideal thing. You don't want one hegemon to literally just be able to do what it wants. You want there to be states limiting each other, but that must exclude China and Russia. Like, we don't want them to veto important interventions in the Security Council. We do want other Western states to veto things like a Greenland invasion or whatever. But that is so far from, and I think sometimes people think that this is kind of a natural way of it being. Like some people wrote books. I think, was it Jared Diamond or someone like that? One of those authors wrote something about how the United States, like, it's just built to be this natural superpower, and like the rivers and like the agriculture and so on. And I think all of those are very insightful points. The United States was not always a superpower. It's a very, very old country at this stage, but there was a time when certainly England was far stronger than the US. Quite recently, the British Navy was stronger than the United States Navy, and only the Second World War kind of interrupted that. Germany was, I mean, obviously a competing power. And all of these things happened, and it was only after that that the United States became a superpower. And now we're in this mental space of the West. Western military is US superpower, and then its competing states are China and Russia. When in fact, in my view, you can bite my head off, both Russia and China are basically paper tigers. Like, these are not actual military threats, except for the perhaps rational fear that they might blow up the whole world with their few nukes. That's a potentially rational fear. I think it's an overblown fear. But as far as their kind of military strength is concerned, neither Russia nor China can project military strength really anywhere on the planet. It's only the United States that's able to project its military strength far afield, and do so in a very epic fashion. So I think the whole model is just, I mean, I love this term that the left gave us, problematic. I think it's a very problematic model, whereby we have the US seen as this natural world hegemon, and the rest of the West is just so helpless and they can never do anything. I think right now Poland could kind of stop a Russian invasion. Poland alone, I think, can stop a Russian invasion. I think France and Germany, if they really wanted to, they could alone stop a Russian invasion. They don't want to. They do not want to. Europe is not. They just don't want to do it. And my point on this is just that the US has done this aspect of it right, and everyone is going to disagree with me on this, and that's fine. They did not subject their foreign policy to democracy. No one voted for what they call forever wars. No one voted for that, but they did it anyway. Democrat, Republican, they said, listen, we are the world superpower. We're going to have elections. We're going to have manifestos. None of us are going to promise war, but both of us are going to do war. And you can vote however you want. This is how it's going to be. And that is something that I think Europe is missing. You made that point about the voters, Nick, and that's important. Security concerns do not come and go based on what a welfare-taking voter decides. There are threats in Europe, to world security, that are there whether they vote for it or not. So European militaries there needs to be an elite compact. We hate elite compacts generally amongst the political class, but there needs to be an elite compact where everyone, left, right, and center, says, listen, we need to end this model whereby the West and Western military power is just the United States. Europe and European individual countries need to stand up and start rearming and become real powers unto themselves again, as they were for most of human history, or most of recent history, I guess, the last 2,000 years. And we're going to do that even if our voters unanimously try and vote against it, because whoever else they vote for will just be part of the elite compact. That is where democracy needs to be severely limited, specifically in the European context. But yeah, I certainly don't see that. I don't see Europe waking up and realizing that everyone got ahead of themselves after the Second World War. Everyone thought that we have achieved a never again situation. Russia and China are contained. They won't do anything. These bloody weak countries, Russia and China, are now allowed to run roughshod all over the world, doing nefarious things, propping up quasi-genocidal regimes in Tehran. And everyone is just thinking, oh my God, well, what can we do? It's like you can do a lot, you just don't want to. So there's lots of problems with this model. I like that Trump is just kind of rejigging a little bit of it. He's doing some of it in a very problematic way, in a very retarded way, as I said. But I think that the model desperately needs change. I have no faith that the Europeans are going to get there by themselves. So either way, I do think the Americans, whether it's Trump or someone else, need to light a fire under Europe's bottom, and that's not happening even yet.
No, I think you are right. So I was just thinking about all the military aid and foreign aid that America has given to its allies, like Egypt being a notable one. I cannot imagine Egypt being able to withstand any sort of invasion or even a civil war. They fail. They can't even handle a student protests, no matter with all this military might that America gave them. Actual military performances has to be from yourself. Has to be built up from yourselves. It has to. We know that foreign aid doesn't actually help, and we know that this is why Poland does well, because they know, hey, we've been invaded from both sides multiple times. This is an existential threat to us. We're going to take this seriously. Something to maybe give a little bit of optimism. It's not yet, because I think that the voters, and I actually agree with you a lot. I think that security is something like you don't have every single time that the police arrest someone. You don't go to Parliament and say, "Hey, let's vote to see if this guy's guilty." What's the sentencing? That's something that we let the executive, or that little part of the executive, handle on its own, and that is something that we elect and maybe that's one thing where representative democracy is supposed to be good, where is we have to trust in these people we elected to actually serve the best interests. And hopefully, even if they're corrupt elites, they will do that because they don't want this country that they govern, corruptly or not, to fall apart. But to be a little bit optimistic, Rheinmetall, which is a company I wanted to invest in, but I couldn't find out how as a South African, sadly. It is the German arms manufacturer. And over the last year, they've grown by 144%. So that's so now keep in mind, this is still market sentiment. So it's not necessarily based on, is it actually doing things well? It is based on some good fundamentals, like their earnings are forecast to grow by 30.81% per year. And they're getting extra business. Germany's trying to rearm. The problem in Europe at the moment is manpower. They did a bunch of surveys in the West, and they found that effectively the majority of military age people will refuse to even be drafted if it comes to that. They're definitely not going to volunteer, and this is a big problem. It was Douglas Murray compared this to Israel in his books, in his newest book on democracies and death cults, which is an excellent book. I advise everyone to read it. Those are the two books I've read this year, which I love, is Psychology of Money and on death cults, on democracies and death cults. Two mandatory reading that you teach in the school, and I think that in it, Israel stands, and this is why I love Israel so much for many reasons, but it really stands as a country that should be a country. Because so many people, like, we feel we're born into a country, we're just going along with emotions, you know. They don't really believe in the cause, they don't really believe in the ideology of that country. When Israel is an ideology, it's an ideology that we want to survive, we are surrounded by existential threats, we are going to serve this greater good that actually is a greater good. It's not just some sort of propaganda tag. That is, that if we don't actually volunteer, if we don't participate in the defense of our country, it will fall apart, and my friends and my family and my community will be killed. And what I love about Israel as well, what we've seen is that when someone who they perceive to be their citizens, and even people who they don't perceive to be their citizens, is threatened, no matter where in the world they are, they go and they save them. And that is something that countries should aspire to be. And I think
the
only
Ethiopian Jews are just on
exactly,
that.
yeah.
The example is the Ethiopian Jews that they went to kind of extract from a foreign country. These are foreigners, but they saw them as their people, and they deployed their military assets to help them. So yeah, very good point.
It's exactly that. And I think that the only other countries which I can see have done that historically, America has been like that in the past. And Britain's been like that in the past. They haven't been like that for over 100 years now. But once upon a time, some British diplomats were taken hostage again in Ethiopia by the mad king of Abyssinia. And when he refused to free them, Queen Victoria ordered soldiers to go and save them. They carried a gunship across the land, rebuilt it inside a lake, and then gunned down his palace, and then he took his own life with a gun that was given to him by Queen Victoria. Very poetic. This is what country should be like. If you're going to be a part of the social contract of being a part of a country, I want that country to defend me. And I just think that we can see that Europe isn't taking this seriously. South Africa definitely does not take this seriously, and this is why I found for so long the concept of being a nationalist or a patriot really hard. And I just realized, no, I was born in the wrong country. Maybe I would be a nationalist or a patriot if I was born in a country that I felt actually represented me and actually cared about me. But yeah, that rant is over. I think.
But I think a good quote to sum up what we're talking about with Europe is: hard times create strong men create good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times. And I think that that's really what typifies the European posture, is that I think for so long they've just lived off of the dividends of the post-World War II era. And, eventually you run out of money, you run out of willpower. And yeah, that kind of softness, I think, is quite dangerous. So, yeah, but look, I think just getting back to the Greenland point just before we close, I think the Danish Prime Minister is correct when he says that if there is any kind of military action by the US against a NATO partner, then that'll be the end of NATO, which I think would be a lamentable thing. I think NATO has lots of problems and inefficiencies and some poor choices over the years, but I think it is significant. And even in the name, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, that speaks to the importance of the Arctic Circle as a strategic theater. So, yeah, so I think hopefully cool heads prevail, and hopefully we can find a way to navigate this difficult situation.
Hopefully Marcus Rubius tames the current emperor.
What do you think has he said anything about Greenland?
He seems very irritable whenever Trump brings up Greenland in any of the videos. I think that he's, as far as I'm aware with him, I would like Marco Rubio to be the next president of the United States. As far as I will probably be disappointed when it happens. I'm always disappointed constantly. But I think the thing about the United States and NATO,
governor of Cuba and the Shah of Iran.
Governor of the extended realms of the extended United States. I think that the United States has as many flaws, NATO has as many flaws, but they're the best we have. And I think that's what we can sum up there. Martin, do you have any closing points for this topic before we get closer to the topic which is closer to home?
Yeah, I just want to say that Iran is still very much on my watch list. I think people forgot it way too quickly. This is a monumental thing that needs American assistance. The Zelensky, I think, at Davos was making very good points all around on specifically on the persistence of the Iranian regime, and he said it would be a massive kind of indictment against the West if the Iranian regime isn't taken down now. Of course, Ukraine is engaged in effectively in a proxy war with Iran because Iran supplies Russia. So that makes sense, and I wish Ukraine could spare some forces to go and help the Iranian resistance. So yeah, I want to beg everyone to please not get distracted by the Greenland thing. It's serious, but it would be serious if other more important things weren't happening. Far more kind of consequential geopolitical things are happening. Yes, for the 20 people who live in Greenland, this is the defining moment of their existence, and I want to reassure them that they will be okay, whether it's under Danish sovereignty or momentary stupid American sovereignty for 10 minutes before they're given back to the Danes. You'll be okay. The people of Iran are not okay. They are being gunned down in their masses. And these are not like the Iranian rebels are not these Islamic kind of jihadis like Osama bin Laden was when the US supported him in Afghanistan. It's not a religious movement trying to establish a better caliphate. These are mostly secular, and obviously they are Muslim, but they're moderate Muslims. Iran is a relatively moderate society when it comes to their ordinary people, middle class society, just trying to get out from under the jackboot of an extremely totalitarian and oppressive regime. This is not Iraq, where we're going to prop up some other kind of faction of Islamists. This is a real civil movement in Iran of moderates trying to just live freely. So I think there's no reason not to support the Iranian resistance movement and to keep pressure on the West to support them, arm them, supply them, and ideally to send actual troops and boots on the ground and jets and so on to help. And don't let Trump's kind of shiny object syndrome with Greenland distract from that. But yeah, that's my last word on this. Thanks, Nick.
My final point on this topic before and I think David's back, but my final point on this is, as well as that, just a little teaser for an article I'm writing next month that I think I've mentioned in the pod before about my idea of these frontline states, these frontline states for the defense of democracy and liberty. And I always say it's Taiwan, it's Israel, and Ukraine. If Iran, and I would say it actually already is, the Iranian resistance is new frontline for democracy and liberty, because if they can win out and turn Iran into a functional democracy as it once was, even if it was a flawed one, it would be a friend of the West. It would stop arming Russia. It would stop being a gateway for also a lot of drug trafficking. It's a very bad. It would help the world immensely, and it would probably, if we can remove Iran from the axis, it'll probably prevent World War III. That is how important this is. And I do agree with you, Martin. I wish that Trump would be taking this more seriously, and that a lot of people would be taking this more seriously. But onto the less spicy but still very aggravating topic from home. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has recently approved a new round of salary increases, which translates to around 100,000 Rand extra per year per ministers who already earn a hang of a lot of money, zero of which I would argue they deserve. There's no skullduggery here. There's no corruption here. This is just our executive, which is already bloated and overpaid, continuing to reward themselves for ineptitude. I would say believe this is just par for the course. There's just our dwindling tax pool being used to pay our continually growing executive. But Martin, do you have any special insights into this, or is it just more of the same?
I guess the special insight is something that you just alluded to, which I think is so crucially important, and everyone misses this. We go mad about Zuma and his Nkandla Palace because it's corrupt and it costs us 250 million Rand. And we go mad about it for years. Like, this was a decade-long controversy about Jacob Zuma's palace that the taxpayers paid for. And the only way to circumvent that outrage is to just turn it into an executive decree, to say, oh no, I am following the law and I'm giving cabinet and MPs and all these people these massive unearned increases. All that these people do day in, day out is find ways to undermine the productive sector of our society. That's all they do. And somehow now it's okay. Now there's no outrage. Now it's a matter of policy debate. Now we're talking about, should it have been 100,000 rand? Maybe it should have been 80,000 rand. Maybe not so much. It's like, why were we outraged at Jacob Zuma and his palace? But now we're just kind of, it's disappointing, but kind of, you have to increase salaries with inflation. Like, it's insulting. We're insulting ourselves. We're insulting our own intelligence by paying so much attention to the form that extraction takes. Like, okay, so that's a corrupt form, so it's bad. Oh, this is a legal form, so it's fine. So that's a crucial point that people need to understand. And yeah, of course, none of these people deserve this. And specifically given the size of our government, the Free Market Foundation has proposed, it's now been 2 years, I think, since we originally put out this proposal to reduce the size of cabinet radically to only 10 portfolios. And then you can say, okay, cool, we have a far more leaner government, so there's more room for increases, assuming that a leaner government does a better job, which I think that's a relatively safe assumption. But this is not what we have. I haven't looked at the numbers recently, but we have something like 75 senior executives in the government, maybe 80 now.
It's 30. Yeah, I haven't looked at the numbers recently, but last I checked in October, it was 32 ministers and 37 deputy ministers.
Yeah. So that's about the kind of that 72 number. So yeah. I mean, that's a complete insult. Because none of these people are actually doing anything. And I know busy work in government passes for work. You'll walk into the Department of Small Business Development and you'll find lots of people kind of typing on their computers and they're doing things. But ultimately, all of that drags down economic growth. It drags down job creation. It drags down economic dynamism. It drags down trade, etc. So no, this is obviously just another instance of this government being socially unconscious, I guess, is a way to frame it, amidst the highest unemployment rate on the planet. And some of they're always keen to remind us, the political elite is always keen to remind us, South Africa is the most unequal country on the planet, as if that's relevant. But okay, cool, let's accept that for a second. And you think part of the solution is to increase the pay of the richest of the rich? I think that's a problem. I think that's, to put it lightly, a problem. So yeah, this is not surprising at all. It's very infuriating. It's very, very frustrating. Because we're going to have a budget soon again. And again, they're going to say, hey, man, I know you voted down VAT last year, but the money's got to come from somewhere, hey? And that's always the argument. And it's like, okay, but what are we paying for? We're paying for fat cat salaries, for fat cat imbeciles to kind of extract from the productive sector of the economy. That is unacceptable. And I don't see how a riotous country like South Africa keeps accepting it. I don't understand that. The South Africans riot for many things correctly. Lack of basic services, people riot. But for this, no riots. This is okay. This is fine. So yeah, that's very frustrating. But par for the course.
And just to put things in perspective of how big our cabinet is, as of 2024, and I'm pretty sure it's grown since then, there's 77 members of the executive, with 32 ministers, 43 deputy ministers. It's probably changed. Because honestly, that number, I'm pretty sure it's probably grown to 80 by now. And we also know that every single minister and deputy minister probably has like 5 consultants who also paid a huge amount of money. But compared to other countries, Germany has 17 portfolios, UK has 24, and the US has between 15 and 26. These are far richer economies, some of which have far larger populations than South Africa. Yet we have one of the largest governments in the world, with very small tax bases, and also they don't get anything done. But I think we know that we can keep yelling at them about how they need to shrink the size of the cabinet, but it's not going to mean much, because for them it's a job creation program. They're buying loyalty for their cronies so they can remain in power. That's all of it. David.
Yeah, I think we should propose to the government that they double their salary for cabinet minister. But the other part of the deal is they have to get rid of deputy ministers and also shrink the size of the cabinet to 10 portfolios, which is what the Free Market Foundation recommended last year in its report, which you can put a link up to. And some people think, oh, yeah, he's just being tongue-in-cheek. We are deadly serious with this proposal. I think it's really all we need. And you've just mentioned some of these other more complex, advanced economies with larger populations that have a smaller cabinet. And I often challenge people to say, like, do you know who the president of Switzerland is? Because I often think the Swiss model is a good one. And very few people actually can tell you who the Swiss president is, including myself, because it's constantly rotating. They have a very small national executive, kind of a federal government. And the cantons have a lot of power and discretion over policy decisions like taxation even, which enables them to compete with each other. South Africa, this is, I think, a symptom of the very high degrees of political centralization. It's the stakes are very high for capturing the center, and it's good to have access to the public coffers. I mean, I was reading in defense of the cabinet that overall wage spending has gone down as a proportion of the budget, but it's still about 31% of the overall consolidated spending, which is pretty huge if you think about it, just on personnel. And look, I think you want a lean, efficient state, and at the moment we have this very large bureaucratic political class that basically is not hugely competitive, not very skilled, that is just shunted into the public sector, and us as citizens have to bear the consequences of the lack of efficiency and lack of capacity. And you only have to look around you on the streets of South Africa to see just how ineffective and incapable our state is. So I think a lot of South Africans would be right to be quite indignant about this, even if it's kind of close to inflation-related adjustment. It's just, I think, quite galling that we have such high levels of unemployment, such high levels of poverty, and politicians whose value add is very questionable at the least. They're getting increases whilst a lot of other people are shouldering the pain. So, yeah, it's not very good. And I think a drum that I often beat as well is this deputy minister category. I think that's really an unnecessary form of executive duplication. It creates all sorts of, inefficiencies and accountability problems within cabinets. It creates lots of infighting. I mean, many departments actually have multiple deputy ministers as well, so not even just one. But like I think DTIC has more than one deputy minister. Although I don't know. Yeah, I think Andrew Whitfield was replaced by another DA deputy minister, if I'm not mistaken. Treasury is another example of another. Yeah, so I wouldn't mind the salary adjustments if the cabinet got smaller, if we had some more afuera in South Africa, but I don't think that's going to happen. So yeah, unfortunately, this is a bit of a small piece of insulting news for the South African populace.
I think if the NC actually heard your recommendations, they would hear the double the salaries. They'll get very excited and then stop reading. And then you'll just end up with 100 new ministries all being paid double. Also, to answer your question, because I think this came up before, and I'm going to finally vindicate you here. Guy Parmelin is the federal president of the Swiss Confederation, and he was elected on the 10th of this. I don't know. It might be Guy Parmelin. I'm not sure. He does look a bit French.
Sounds like a kind of a cheese.
Yeah, that actually does. Parmalat. But yeah, he was elected on the 10th of December, 2025. And I find it actually fascinating. I have a lot of friends who closely follow foreign elections, and they follow it almost like a sports match. They've never, ever shown any interest in a Swiss election. I did not know that there was an election in Switzerland recently until now, that he literally only came to office on the 1st of January of this year. We heard nothing about that. Don't
they have like a 1-year term or something very short like that?
Let's see. How long is the Swiss term? Sorry about my machine gun.
I think the chancellor.
1 year,
the chancellor rotates and the president has a fixed term, I think. I'm not
the
sure.
president,
I think it's
the president of the Swiss Confederation serves a 1-year term. That's very cool. The position rotates annually among the 7 members of the Federal Council, with the vice president usually assuming the presidency following the following year. There are no term limits over all the 4 council membership. That's very interesting.
Switzerland's quite based in general, I think, Nicholas.
Yeah, they are.
I mean, we were complaining about, the problems affecting Europe and how it's going soft, but actually Switzerland has always had a very strong kind of independent tradition. I mean, if you visit there, it's actually really interesting. I mean, there's very high levels of gun ownership, obviously very great respect for economic freedom and low taxation, deregulation. I think some of that has changed a bit since the heyday. And like I mentioned, there's a lot of internal competition that the federal system, the canton system, generates and fosters. But, I think it's telling that also Switzerland is not part of the EU. It still has a very kind of free trade posture. It's very happy to deal in trade. But then also a kind of rugged realism around international security threats. You walk around the various cities of Switzerland, and you'll see underground bunkers everywhere, and there's lots of protocols for that. I mean, you go to the bathroom, and the door is kind of like this thick because it kind of doubles as a bomb shelter. So, yeah, I think the world can learn a lot from Switzerland, and it has obviously some geographic advantages, big mountainous terrain, which makes it easier to defend. But I think there's a kind of a nice balance there. There's a kind of good civic culture, but then also like a real appreciation for individualism and freedom.
I think the only problem with Switzerland is it's too good, so that's driven up the price of living because everybody wants to live there. It'd be nice if they got a little bit shit, so then they get a little bit cheaper, so it'd be cheaper to go there.
And there's lots of underground bunkers filled with gold as well, which is
some of that gold does need to go to Israel where it belongs. But I'm just flying my colors high there. But I think that's most of our podcasts are just discussing how great other countries are and how terrible South Africa is. I think this is the hard question, but do you think that let's put a little bit of a counterfactual, a hypothetical here. If another party like the DA was elected and became the majority party, but let's say not by too much, let's say they were able to barely scrape in as the senior member of a coalition, and maybe let's just say they managed to, the ANC doesn't have to be a part of that coalition, would they be able to shrink cabinet? And do you think they would? And Martin, you can start with this.
No. Look, I think the problem with the DA, and I said this last week, is that they are someone like Rob Dugan will disagree with me on this, but let's say in general they're not corrupt. They're these are people who get into politics and they want to do good, they want to help, they have a sense of public service, so they do the day-to-day stuff of governance right. Like I think any of us and any decent person watching, if you get a job in the government, you're like, okay, I have work to do, so I'm going to do the work. They're going to give me a guideline, like what is it that you need to do, and I'm going to do the thing that the guideline says. That is the DA. And if you read South Africa's state work guidelines, it's pretty good. Like people always say we have good policy but bad implementation. I think that's wrong. But if you read the policy, it's not like it says you will do X and then you will steal R1 million and then you'll do that and then you'll steal another. Like it says, no, actually you have to do some work. So the DA can take that stuff and it's going to look at it and it's going to do what it says. That's what the DA does. The DA is horrible at reform. Like it is terrible at reform. And I think if you give the DA a senior partner status in a coalition, it'll be even more difficult still to reform if it didn't have an outright majority. But even if it had an outright majority, I think its priority will always be to kind of be the better ANC. I think that they have some of their own value propositions, but they broadly think that the core of South African public policy as a the core of South African public policy is broadly okay. and they will govern in line with that. And that means we will, I think, retain the large civil service under a DA government, whether coalition or outright, because more or less South Africa aligns with global kind of government population numbers, more or less. We're a little bit high, but more or less we align. And the DA will see that as well. We have a country of unique problems, and we need people to work at those problems, rather than understanding, as they should as liberals, that the reason we're doing so terribly is because we have a uniquely unproductive private sector, uniquely unproductive public sector. And therefore, we need to get those people actually working inside the private sector. I don't think the DA has shown any willingness to entertain that insight. Um, of course, and this is something that some of our listeners sometimes miss. Like, they see markets responding positively to the DA and the DA government, and they say, "Oh, you see, are you prepared to now concede that you were wrong? Look, there's increased investor sentiment in South Africa, and there's now growth, and the rand is strengthening." It's like, we never said that that is not what would happen. Of course, that's going to happen if there's a DA majority government. More or less, South Africa's corporate sector, I think, privately stands behind the DA, and I think when foreign companies look at the DA, they think this is a broadly Western European kind of party that's governing in the Western European mode, and all of that will happen. And it will lead to a slow uptick in how the country performs. That's what I would predict. But it will not eliminate unemployment. It will not turn economic growth like up to 11 as it should. And I'm not fantasizing here. These are all things that have happened in history. Like, these are things that can happen. You can have an explosion in growth. You can have an explosion in employment. These are all things that can happen if you are invested enough in or have enough confidence in the idea that leads to that. It is only because Singapore understood that a free market actually does work. It's not an idea, it actually does work. That Singapore and South Korea and these countries, like they started poorer than South Africa and are now orders of magnitude per capita richer than South Africa in a short space of time. It is only because Ukraine, Estonia, and these countries understood the ravages of communism very deeply. It's not something they read about, it's something they experienced. It's only because they understood that so deeply that at the end of communist rule, they, like, in less than a generation, they turned complete communist deprivation into Western levels of prosperity. So all of these things are possible. And then the other possibility is also you have a slow upward ticking, and you hope that the DA doesn't get voted out during that period. But you go slowly upwards, and then in 40 years, South Africa has more or less stabilized. I think that is ultimately the DA's problem. It does not have confidence in the ideas that it pretends to believe in.
David, so are you as pessimistic as Martin is about our way forward with the DA? I'm sadly
Hard
Yeah,
to
sorry.
speculate about what the DA would do in power. I mean, I often see some DA members of the executive or spokespeople saying, you know, look, we would love to do what Javier Milei is doing in Argentina, but, you know, the voters need to vote for us and secure us a firm majority, and then we would do it. So I like to think that they would be true to their word. But yeah, you know, I think this is kind of one of the unfortunate aspects of politics, is that, you know, people always talk about institutional design and how it's important to have strong institutions and everything, but a lot of these institutions actually, and this kind of gets to what we were talking about with Europe earlier, is it's kind of like these layers of sediment. Every year, kind of new rules, new regulations, new processes get added, and it has this kind of ossifying effect. And that's why I think it would be actually very difficult to unwind some of these cabinets. But, you know, it requires leadership, and it actually requires vision. And I think Martin's point is really important. Like, you actually need to follow through and actually not just give verbal commitment to some of these principles, but actually see, like, well, how can you actually implement it? And, you know, somebody like Javier Milei, it was kind of unthinkable that you could get rid of the Ministry of Sport or the Ministry of Gender Equality or whatever, but he just very powerfully ripped that label off the wall and said, afuera, you know, you can't just somewhere decide you're not going to have this department anymore. And it doesn't mean that that's not an important issue in your society. And I think that's the other bugbear that I have is just because you value something doesn't mean there must be a ministry for it. Everybody in South Africa loves sport, but you don't really need a sports ministry. Like, you might need some governing bodies and associations setting rules or standards or whatever in sport. But first of all, those don't need to be and shouldn't be national institutions. Like the Springboks are almost their own kind of institution, their own brand that transcends politics, actually. Like, Gayton McKenzie doesn't really, or any other sports minister doesn't really kind of determine the success of the Springboks. Somebody like Rassie Erasmus or Siya Kolisi who determines the success of the Springboks. So I think we also need to get out of this status mentality that like cabinet is there to kind of like manage society, and that we kind of need a department for every single aspect of our lives. We can actually consolidate a lot of these functions, we can trim them down, and that's a very important mindset to have, and I think would translate into leaner, more efficient and effective government. That's it for me.
So I think that's a very good point. And just to rewind a bit to something you said, Martin, when you're speaking about these ex-communist countries which realized what communism had done to them, so they went in the opposite direction, they learned from the mistakes. I was really saying that it's so sad that South Africa didn't follow in the same footsteps, because South Africa was ravaged by race-based socialism under apartheid, and the ANC is like, hey, let's have a few years of actually embracing some good policies while corrupting it with our bad policies, and then let's just try to force our way back. And it's only our civil society and some other opposition that kind of holds them back from going all the way. Because I think that we're under no delusion that the ANC, if it thought it could get away with having a reverse apartheid, I think it would. I think that to go over the main topic, what you're saying, David, about institutions and how hard it is to break bad institutions, this kind of goes to the point in the book Why Nations Fail, where bad institutions are self-enforcing and good institutions are self-enforcing. And what we need is to get to a point where we have a virtuous circle, is what they call it, the authors, where we have institutions that incentivize and reinforce good institutions. Now, the question is, how do we break the bad ones? How do we get new ones? And I think you need people like Javier Milei who are revolutionary, who actually just decide, hey, we can just rip the names off the board, as you said. But I don't think we have any decent enough politicians in South Africa who have that power. Yeah.
So institutions matter, but I think ideology matters more.
Mm-hmm.
And in Why Nations Fail, Asamoah and Robinson, they talk about the Korean Peninsula. It's basically very similar geography, history, culture. And, there's this big difference between these two countries. The one has inclusive institutions, the other extractive institutions. But the question is, why do they have such vast differences in the institutional design? Is because of the ideological framework that informs that. So, that's why you need the idea set. And I think Martin's point is very important. If you just come into a ministry, there's this great tendency for status quo bias. It's like, okay, well, this is the building, these are the rules, this is how we do things, these are all the people here. But actually, where does that come from? Why is it there? You need to ask these kind of first principle questions, and your ideological framework helps you to do that, And I think socialists do this all the time. They're like, okay, well, here's this thing called a university or a business or a social movement or something, and we're going to inject it with the DNA of our ideology, and we're going to corrupt it, and we're going to steer it in a direction that we want. So I think liberals need to be very intentional about that. And I think there's this mistake that a lot of liberals make often, is like the kind of the map is the territory, and it's just like everything's kind of neutral, all these neutral institutions, and we just have to run them better than others do. No, you must deliberately and intentionally steer them towards liberty.
So I think the solution is what I think Martin and I have been suggesting for a long time, is a liberal takeover of the DA. You'd think that a liberal party wouldn't need to have a liberal takeover. But I think that's a good place for us to end this. So we discussed Greenland and why we should rather be discussing Iran. And we discussed that South Africa is just more of the same. To everyone who listened, I hope you found some good insight and learned something. And I hope you join us next week on the Rational Side podcast. Make sure to follow us on the website formerly known as Twitter, X, on Facebook, and also make sure to subscribe to our Substack, rationalstandard.com. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week.